Good morning, everyone. I'd like for us to go ahead and call the committee meeting to order and for members to be seated. At this time, I'd like to call on MLA Joey Ebanks to to lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we beseech Thee to guide this morning's proceedings of this Public Accounts Committee, that the members and witnesses may conduct themselves in a manner that pleases You, Almighty. Pray for Your blessings on all of us present here today and the citizens of the Cayman Islands. We ask these things in our Heavenly Father's name. Amen.
Amen. Let's be seated. Well, good morning once again, everyone, and very happy New Year to members of the committee and to the Auditor General and to the staff of the Ministry of Finance. This morning we are here to examine publicly the report of the Auditor General dated May 2014 entitled Management of Travel and Hospitality Expenditures. At the appropriate time, I'm going to invite the Auditor General to make an opening statement to this committee. But just an opening remark on my part as chair, this report itself has not been without its controversy. And it is somewhat unusual this morning in that we have one member of this committee who would wish to appear before and give evidence. I'm speaking particularly of the Leader of Opposition, who has indicated that he does have evidence he would like to give to this committee. And I have agreed with him that he can appear as a witness, and at the appropriate time, I think at the very outset of this hearing, once the Auditor General has made his opening statement, then I will invite the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Bush, to give his testimony to this committee this morning. So with those few comments, I will go ahead and say once again, welcome to you, Auditor General, and invite you at this point in time to make your opening statement to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the Public Accounts Committee, ladies and gentlemen, may I first take this opportunity to wish you all a very happy new year. I look forward to working productively with the committee over the coming year to support accountability in the use of public resources. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some initial comments on my performance audit on the management of travel and hospitality expenditure, which was published in May 2014. Travel and hospitality expenditures are incurred for a wide spectrum of activities and events that support an elected government in its delivery of its policies and programs. Some of the supporting activities include policy development, service delivery, regional international relations, and the training and development of officials. Within this context, it is important that government can undertake official travel or provide hospitality. However, due to the nature of these expenditures, they can be considered particularly difficult to manage. If not managed effectively, they could be seen as providing personal benefits to officials. Moreover, it is sometimes challenging to demonstrate that the expenditures are consistent with the organization's objectives. As a result, they are usually subject to heightened public interest and increased levels of scrutiny. The amount of money may be small in the context of an organization's total expenditures. However, each expenditure decision is important because improper expenditures could harm the reputation of and trust in the entity as well as the entire public sector. In the Cayman Islands, the costs associated with travel and hospitality of government have received considerable public interest and criticism. As a result of the increased risks around these types of expenditures, the heightened public interest, and issues that have been raised through our financial audits, and the fact that because of poor record keeping and information available, I have not always been able to complete the financial audits of a number of organizations in a reasonable way and report on how public money was being spent, I decided to undertake this audit. The purpose of this audit was to provide an assessment of how well the Cayman Islands government managed travel and hospitality expenditure and whether due regard was paid to obtaining appropriate value for money. That is, travel and hospitality expenditures represent the economic and efficient use of funds given the nature of activity in relation to the achievement of the government's mandate. My audit only covered travel and hospitality expenditures by core government officials. I did not look at spending in the statutory authorities and government companies at this time. We looked at expenditures from July 2009 through to December 2012. Based on the government's own records, travel and hospitality expenditures accounted for approximately $8.6 million between the 1st of July 2009 and 30th of June 2012. While it is small in proportion to the overall amount spent by government, it is still a very large amount of money, an amount that is subject to a lot of discretion by public servants. Fundamental to the effective management of these types of expenditures is the clear articulation of the policies for incurring travel and hospitality expenditure supported by robust procedures and controls to ensure compliance. I found that there was an absence of well-defined policies and ineffective or absent procedures and controls. Policies that were in place were inconsistent across government, and officials were left with significant, if not complete, discretion with regard to how travel and hospitality expenditures were incurred. Furthermore, monitoring and reporting of these transactions by management was virtually non-existent. We identified a number of examples in this report where government had either not clearly demonstrated the value or benefit of the expenditure incurred, or where public funds had been potentially misused. One of the key issues we found was that the supporting documentation for travel and hospitality expenditure was very poor, and in some cases non-existent, and the records in the accounting system unreliable. As a result, we were not able to carry out all the audit procedures we had planned, limiting the scope of our audit and our ability to provide more information to the reader on how these expenditures had been managed or quantify how much the government mishandled or wasted during the period reviewed. For example, out of over 80 sample items or individual expenditures my auditors selected for review, almost half of them lacked the necessary support to determine what was being paid, and about 10% of the expenditures we reviewed, there was absolutely nothing to support the expenditures incurred. Sound record keeping is fundamental to effective administration and stewardship of public resources. There is no excuse for the issues we have found, and whilst it may be indicative of just poor management and administration, it creates the perception at least of the misuse of public funds and increases the risk of fraud significantly. Other than not being able to complete the audit because of a lack of documentation, my audit team documented some serious problems with how government spent public funds for travel and hospitality. Here are some of the things that we identified. In respect of travel advances, we found that the financial officers were writing checks for travel expenses, sometimes with no supporting documentation and understanding whether travel occurred or not. In one department, for example, travel advances provided to one employee in the amount of $32,000 were written off because the financial officer did not know if the employee had even traveled and apparently could not provide the supporting documentation. In that ministry, a total of $167,000 of advances given to employees were written off because, again, employees could not provide the evidence for their expenditures. My auditors found approximately $458,000 in travel and hospitality expenditures charged on credit cards and paid by finance officers where they did not get sufficient receipts to tell what the money was being spent on. In one case, we found a former minister used a credit card to pay for travel and hospitality expenses for convenience and in accordance with the policy issued by government officials. However, my auditors found that the minister, having incurred the credit card expenditures, then self-approved the payment of the credit card bill which the chief financial officer paid, even though there was no evidence to demonstrate that the expenses were incurred for government business. In other cases, we found individuals receiving advances for meals and other expenses while on travel, and then getting the same expenses reimbursed a second time through the charges on their credit cards. The basic financial controls my auditors expected to find were absent. Over the last 5 to 6 years, the government has had to manage with scarce resources. Have had to make some very difficult, significant cuts in expenditure to balance the budget or limit their deficits. While this was happening, our audit found that the monitoring and controls for travel and hospitality expenditures were weak and budget overruns occurred. No one in government was effectively minding the store when it came to spending on this very discretionary area of expenditure. Of even greater concern, because of inconsistent recording in the accounts for travel and spending, my auditors found that government officials didn't really know how much it was spending for public servants on travel. With respect to reporting on travel and hospitality expenditures, it only takes a quick look at the government's website to know that there's very little information available about public sector spending on government and travel and hospitality. We have recommended that government needs to do a better job of proactively disclosing the details around official travel. With the control environment in a poor state, we believe that this proactive disclosure may also have the effect of ensuring greater care when it comes to incurring the expenditures in the first place. The report includes a number of examples where it was clear that government did not get value for money for travel and hospitality. While much of the cause for this was a lack of government policy, we also found a lack of due diligence and reasonable efforts to ensure that rules that existed at the time were being followed. In conclusion, I'm pleased to say that we have had good discussions with the Deputy Governor and his team, and that he has provided a response to the recommendations. I welcome the introduction by the government during the course of our audit of a formal travel policy, which addresses a number of the issues we have reported on, and its future extension to areas including hospitality. I also welcome the lead taken by the Premier and the Deputy Governor in the last year of disclosing their travel costs, and would encourage the government to implement this in a systematic and consistent manner for all senior managers across the public service. I also look forward to seeing the results of the government's internal audit services travel and expenditure audit, commissioned by the Deputy Governor to assess compliance with the government's new travel policy. However, more needs to be done to ensure that officials have a clear way forward to address the underlying problems around behaviours, controls and processes which have led to the serious findings in this report. While it is important to have a robust and comprehensive policy, ensuring that it is effectively implemented and getting assurance that it is being complied with is equally, if not more important. And I could cite a number of examples where laws, policies and regulations have been put in place but without the intended outcomes due to poor implementation and non-compliance. The issues we have reported on with respect to the management of travel and hospitality expenditures are indicative of the broader issues that we have found in the audits of financial statements around effective control, management and monitoring of the use of government resources. I hope that this report will provide further impetus for the management of public resources with greater diligence and in line with the public's expectations. I look forward to the government taking action in response to the findings and recommendations discussed in this report. Finally, I look forward to assisting the Public Accounts Committee over the course of this hearing by providing additional information and clarification where necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor General, for that opening statement. Members of the committee, do you have any questions for the, well, I should say I'm going to open this up for questions of the Auditor General for you to ask at this point in time before we start into taking testimony from witnesses. Mr. Connolly.
Mr. Chairman, through you to the Auditor General. In your findings, in your opinion, was there any evidence of political interference or intimidation on COs and CFOs with regards to ticking off some of these expenditures, etc.?
We didn't have any explicit evidence of that happening. The question for me is, why did chief financial officers pay unauthorized bills which they had no evidence for? So that's the big question. But in terms of that specific issue, we had no explicit evidence to support that at this stage.
Just have a question, not for the AG, but I see the Financial Secretary here.
Mr. Connolly, difficult because Mr. Financial Secretary is not here as a witness to these proceedings, as to give evidence.
Yeah, it was a question about accountability of CFOs and what would happen if there were findings, just for my clarification.
I would ask, I don't want to put the Financial Secretary on the spot. I would say, FS, if you're prepared to answer it. It's been unusual. I don't want to cause any upset, but if Mr. Connolly, it would be more appropriate for you to ask that of maybe the CFO or someone else on the witness list here.
Or maybe to the AG?
The Deputy Governor will be in later on today,
Yes.
I think.
I'll ask it.
Save it for the DG, Deputy Governor, when he comes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hugh.
Mr. Chairman, through you, can the Auditor General tell us at what level did you find these ambiguities? I mean, was it almost all the way across in most instances, or was it, you know, half and half? I mean, what were you seeing in that?
Well, our audit concentrated on two ministries in particular, which are the finance, tourism and development, and DALA, District Administration of Works, Lands and Agriculture at the time. But in terms of the broad picture around travel and hospitality, we did review the picture across the whole of the core government in terms of policies and procedures in place. And the totality of that was that there was no clear policies and procedures across the whole of government in that perspective. But we concentrated on those two ministries because they represented approximately, I think it was 70% or more of the expenditures for government on travel and hospitality. And in terms of some of the detailed findings around individual transactions, that's where we focused on those entities. But they gave us assurance across the broader perspective because they represented such a significant proportion of the total expenditure. But in the general terms around the policies, procedures, and monitoring, things like that, the general overarching, we surveyed across the whole of the core government, and the findings are generally related to the whole of the core government in that respect.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so in the two ministries that you focused on, you spoke about instances where I think it was $32,000. You know, you couldn't prove that they couldn't provide evidence that the person had actually traveled or in a receipt. That sort of situation, was that just? I mean, was it just widely accepted throughout and in many instances, or were there just specific? Well, I'm just trying to get the gravity of what was transpiring back then to where we're coming to now.
For example, in terms of travel advances, we've seen that across the piece to an extent. For example, the whole ministry, there was 167,000 that were written off over the course of a period of time, where there was no evidence for. And you know, and that is just one example. And there's other examples where there was no actual documentation to support, or limited or partial documentation to support the transactions that were incurring as well. And we're talking about things like even the bill for the airline travel tickets. You know, there's no bills for tickets to say where they put, even to tell where they went and what class of travel, things like that. No receipts for hotels. Some basic documentation we're talking about here, not anything that's unusual.
Captain Eugene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you, could the Auditor General say whether or not, I know he said he was concentrating on two ministries, did he find any other questionable activities in any of the other ministries, or was just concentrating on two ministries?
Sure. I think while we didn't look at individual specific transactions, we have found in this audit, we have found in other financial audits transactions where there's been issues in terms of supporting documentation for various ministries. But as I go back to my original point, the control frameworks and the policies and procedures were not in place across the whole of government. So there was opportunities for it didn't provide a framework to ensure that management of travel and hospitality was managed effectively. So that was across the piece. But in terms of this audit, we specifically concentrate on those two ministries. But we have seen through our financial audits on other ministries where there's been examples of poor record keeping, poor documentation, and other issues.
Mr. Chairman, through you, based on what the Auditor General just said, then why didn't he concentrate on all the ministries instead of just the two ministries that he pointed out?
In terms of our audit scope and an efficient audit, we concentrate on the ministries where there was greatest expenditure to provide us with the greatest assurance regarding the management of travel and hospitality. Standard audit practices to look at sampling and to look at areas of material expenditure and concentrate on those. And that provided us with the greatest assurance around how much, or lack of assurance, I should say, in this instance, around how these expenditures are managed. When approximately 70% of the expenditures were managed by 2 ministries, that was clear from our audit strategy that would be the most effective way to get that relevant assurance.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In so doing, though, the Auditor General has given the impression that everything was working fine in all the other ministries, and it was only these 2 ministries that he singled out to concentrate on. I would feel a lot better if it was done across the board instead of just the 2 ministries. I can understand that those were the 2 with the most expenditures, but nonetheless, it should be a level playing field all across.
Auditor General.
I will start from the perspective that we looked at the policies and processes across the whole of the organization to determine whether that was the case, whether there was issues across the case, and we've reported that the fact that across the government there were no policies and procedures, etc., in place. Audit does not look at things 100%. We do not test everything 100%. We have an audit strategy which is designed to get the most effective assurance, concentrate on the material areas and material expenditures. And otherwise, we would be spending inordinate amounts of time with limited and scarce resources to carry out our work. We have to reach an opinion based on our professional judgment on our audit strategy, which is to get as much assurance as we can, and this is what we've done. When you've got 70% of the expenditures going through 2 ministries, it's clear common sense and appropriate to get assurance about the largest amount of expenditure and use that for the basis. You know. Okay. And we also had the evidence from other audits that there was similar issues in other entities as well. So there was it's not like we didn't rely on that evidence as well in terms of forming our opinion as well.
Other questions, Captain Eugene? No? Okay. Members of the committee, any other questions of the Auditor General? Okay. Then if that's the case, no further questions, then we'll go ahead and we'll call our first witness before the committee, and I'd like to call on the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable McKeeva Bush. Good morning, Mr. Bush. Thank you for appearing before the committee. Most unusual, I think, to have a sitting member of the Public Accounts Committee also appearing before it as a witness, but I do understand that you have some important information that you would like to share with the committee in considering this report. For the record, though, could I just ask you to state your name and your position before we can then go ahead and proceed with your evidence?
First, let me thank you, Mr. Chairman, for offering me to be a witness, or asked me to be a witness, and I certainly believe that I should be able to have spoken and given the information that I know about as a member in whichever fashion possible. It wouldn't be the first time. Over the 30 years I've been here, you can call previous ministers. They don't have to come, but you can call them. Certainly you can call current ministers, but of course current minister would not know. Therefore, the reason why you are able to call somebody else. You can call other people if necessary. And that's what ought to be done, or else what's going to happen? You're only going to have the view of the Auditor General and his staff, and God only knows what they can say. Certainly some of what they say is certainly not true, and a lot of things are said that could have been straightened out by, if they had called me, for instance, and asked me about it, rather than stating things and making people believe that that's what took place. And I'm going to state that throughout what I've got to say on the various points. There are several areas here I would hope that you would ask me questions about. Certainly I want to address them because I want to be able to say the facts as I know them on various parts, the management of travel and hospitality expenditures. No hospitality expenditure policies or guidance. No policies or controls in place for members of the Legislative Assembly. Ineffective procedures for processing travel expenditures. Credit card policies and controls disregarded. Mishandling of public funds by ministers and officials. And various other points that they have. For instance, the apprenticeship program, and retirement, farewell for collective customs, prayer meeting, rentals for West Bay. I don't know which one that was. Birthday lunch for the minister. I'd like to know when that was. Rental of private residence. And these are a number of things that I can speak to and give the facts on as they took place. And so the problem that we have as a Public Accounts Committee and as a legislature is that these reports go public first. And in my opinion, that the audit office ought to send that report to the Public Accounts Committee who deals with it, and then it's extrapolated, and then the public gets the information. And that is done in public hearing here, and so it's not hiding anything from anybody. But to have this where people's minds are already fixed, you're coming after the facts, after the audit office have already influenced public opinion.
But I hear what you say with regard to that, Mr. Bush, but I'm sure you already know that the standing orders provide that these reports become public once they have been provided to the
And that's what I'm
Legislative
saying ought to
Assembly.
be changed.
We need to change
I've
it.
never agreed on that, Mr. Chairman.
I hear you, and if I remember, it's one of the things I advocate for in this assembly is that we really need to update our standing orders.
Yes,
to
well,
reflect
you're in a
it.
good position. You're part of the government, so you ought to be able to get these things.
I invite you, Mr. Bush, to go ahead and make your statement.
And for the purposes of my three colleagues, I want to stop at each point and they can ask questions which they ought to if necessary. Mr. Chairman, on page 4 and table 1, the audit office mentions travel and hospitality expenditures reflected a rising trend. However, Mr. Chairman, when you look at the expenditure, year on year, movement is somewhat flat. 2011 increased by 6%, and 2012 increased year on year by 102 or 3% when you look at it all. If you take these amounts another step further and consider them on a monthly basis, it is equivalent to $238,000, 36 months divided 8.5 million. Core government, the entire government, not just the Ministry of Finance and Tourism. That's my reading. and an auditor's reading of this. Is this unreasonable for a government to spend on travel and hospitality on a monthly basis? A government, Mr. Chairman, who depends on visitors and investment to run its economy, to advertise, to promote. The graph or the statements made by the audit office also does not indicate which and how many departments or ministry or units in the core government this 8.5 million comprises. I don't know if you can say otherwise than that, Mr. Chairman. But another important aspect that should have been noted in this audit to give the reader a true and very clear picture would have been what was initially budgeted for travel and hospitality expenditures for these years that are mentioned. That way, the public would know if their government was being fiscally prudent and managing expenditures properly. For example, Mr. Chairman, if the audit office had stated what was initially budgeted each year for these expenses, the public would have known if travel expenditure were over or under budget. The audit office states it focused on Ministry of Finance and Ministry of District Administration because these two ministries made up 70% of the travel expenditure for the period in question. Now, what I cannot do, Mr. Chairman, is to say what was spent for the Ministry of District Administration or any other ministry at the time other than broad figures that you would get at budget time or get in this House. However, what the audit office fails to report is that the Minister of Finance at the time of the audit included regional matters, included financial services, which included all of the OECD negotiations and tax information agreements that required traveling all over the world to sign. It included tourism. The Minister of Finance included Cayman Airways. It included the docks development, which included planning. It included Turtle Farm. It included public finance, all of these which required traveling, and of course the Premier's other responsibilities, which meant traveling to London and other matters separately. And let it be understood, this travel was not only for the minister, but it was also for responsible and relevant staff in the ministry and other areas as well. And we traveled for all those things as we felt we had to promote this country to try to get our economy back on track. And I believe the projects you are seeing today and some of the work and people who say they're coming here took place because we went and promoted ourselves in Hong Kong and talked to the various law firms there. Took place in China because we went and promoted and did what we had to do because we believe that is the right thing to do. Took place because we went with Cayman Finance. I didn't go to the London, for instance, House of Lords invitation that the Caribbean Council have. That is nothing but politicking with a few business people who want business in Cayman. I went to London and other areas to speak at the various finance companies meetings, like the Financial Times meeting. Anyway, I thought I should point that out on that, and I don't know if anybody want to ask me a question on it.
I do have one question for you, and it concerns really what you first started to talk about on page 4 of the report with the table 1. Mm-hmm. Do you know what the budgeted amounts were for government for those years that you spoke of?
No, I would have known, but I don't have the figures.
You don't have it with you? Okay.
No.
Okay.
What the police didn't take out my hair, they didn't bring back. I don't know if
Mr. Chairman, through you. Mr. Bush, I understand all you just said as well, and I have one question to ask. And based on the report, there were issues surrounding the lack of documentation and receipts and things like that are standard in private sector. Is that something that just simply wasn't requested at the time, or what do you do when you
maybe-
return from a trip?
I don't know if that is in contained. Like I said, I'm going to speak on several areas. Maybe you want to hold that question until you get a relevant point, or if that is the most relevant point for you. I
But
think
I'm just trying to-
addresses that some other place. But what I can say is that most things are paid by the, you know, if you travel as a minister, your ministry has a head, a vote, and that comes from that. And it's either paid, if it's local, it's paid by a check, not cash. And if they even paid by cash, they would have to get some kind of receipt. But it's paid by a check from government, and that check should be in government. So that is documentation. And the purpose for it being paid would be there as well. Some kind of, you know, invoice would be available. If you're traveling overseas, you know what you're spending is by your credit card, and that is on your credit card statement. Nobody can hide that. That is there. You spent it, and it's paid for by that. So that kind of documentation is the only way that something like that, I think, takes place. I'm not the finance person. I'm the minister, and the reason why I choose to be when I was asked whether I want to be a witness or choose to be a witness and not as a member, is because I do have knowledge of some of these things. I wouldn't know finite details about what the finance staff did, but certainly relevant information ought to be available within a 3-year period, as he's looking at. If you went to China to the conferences and promotional tours that we took, we certainly, I would think that the staff paid by those, either paid something directly transferable from here from the bank or from the credit card or there. But those things are readily available.
Thank you, Mr. Bush, Mr. Chairman, through you. And I'm just, because of, you know, all you're saying is great. What I have, when I try to wrap my mind around the report, and I know you'll go into more detail with other things, is the fact that, and I'm trying to figure out whether it is that the information were not provided to the CFOs, or whether or whether their information was provided to the CFOs and the CFOs just simply didn't do their job properly and record that information. The credit cards, for instance, and I appreciate that if your PA or a PA were to purchase an airline ticket, that receipt should have been sent on to the CFO. But when you're traveling, you have a per diem, and I'm just, you know, using my my experience as it relates to private sector. When you're traveling and you have a per diem, and then you use a credit card, in my case would be the government credit card, the company's credit card. If I am going to use that credit card at facility X, I need to provide a receipt to show that it was either for food or drink or accommodation, or because you can't just go by the name of it. The credit card will just simply say, you know, business X, and then the amount it was. So when I go back, so if I'm giving,
Mr. Hughes, some of them would say that you paid at a
it's
restaurant.
not a detailed receipt.
Well, if
Some-
you're paying,
some-
for,
the
if
name
you're
of the
paying
company.
for food, you certainly would know it's a restaurant you're paying at. You shouldn't want to know any more than that. I mean, unless you want to say you had certain amount of liquor or wine, or you ate chicken
Right,
instead
well,
of meat.
yeah,
I don't know
because-
if that's what you kind of detail you're looking.
Yes, because as a business manager, if I am giving someone per diem to buy their food, and I see, for instance, I own a restaurant, but the name of the account that holds that restaurant is not the same name as the restaurant. It's in the company holdings name. So the receipt from a credit card may come out in the company holdings name and not the name of the restaurant. So I need my employees to bring back a receipt to me to say, this was for entertaining Mr. So-and-so, or this is what I saw was done there.
Mr.
So I'm
Hugh,
just trying to get understanding when the auditor...
and I just want to tell you,
Yeah.
and Mr. Chairman, and that came up when they had that sham case against me over there.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of getting credit cards, that used to take place All that used to take
Where you
place
handing the receipt?
years ago
Okay.
when they used to have cash. They used to give you cash to travel with. So you had to bring back slips and slips of papers, and sometimes you lost them, all these different things. It's easy enough to bring back now the hotel bill plus your credit card statement. When they changed, if you look at the reason why they changed, was specifically because of that. It was because they didn't want necessarily having all those little pieces of paper and all those different things. So they created the opportunity to have a credit card so that you could have a record. Nobody can say that you didn't spend $2,000 or $10 by the government credit card.
Okay.
That's
So
what we hid.
it wasn't requested from you then?
No.
Okay.
It was never requested. All it was, when we got the credit cards, if you look,
You just got the statement?
yes, if you look at the records of this house that created the credit card, it says that, what it was for. That you didn't have to have all these little pieces of paper all over the place.
Thank you.
And you lost them.
Mr. Chairman, through you, although there wasn't any policy in place that was standardized, as a member of government and the leader of government, was there at any point in time where you would have suggested that there should be a comprehensive policy
What are you talking about?
in terms of our kind of obligation to look after the public funds, both as members of
Are you
the
speaking to a specific point in this? Because I want to go by point, page by page of the report, and you can hold your question till we, not far from here, we will talk about ineffective procedures for processing travel expenditures or no policies or controls in place for members of the Legislative Assembly. That is addressed in the report. So if you wouldn't mind waiting until we get to that point.
I don't mind holding my question,
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Thanks.
And you know, in line with what the member has asked, I'll do it.
When we
point by
get to
point.
that, and it's not far from here.
Please proceed, Mr. Bush.
The other point is no hospitality expenditure policies or guidance. And on page 9, audit point 27, the audit office speaks of $1.5 million being spent over 3 years on parties, dinners, and social functions. Again, Mr. Chairman, if you were to divide this amount, it is approximately $42,000 per month, 1.5 million into 36 months. The audit office fails in this report to state the purpose for these parties, dinners, or social functions they speak to. They also fail to document what was selected as a sample of those areas to give their opinions on. Surely, the audit office didn't look at all transactions of the 1.5 million. They could have made a determination of what these functions were through the system's descriptions. The system descriptions could have told them that. If that was not available to the audit office, I would think the proper protocol would have been to speak with the senior staff responsible or the responsible minister for that period, as I spoke to earlier, which would have been able to speak to myself to confirm what the event or events was relating to. Obviously, they didn't talk to ministers. I can say they didn't talk to McKeever Bush. Obviously, I think the wording here it gives the readers of the report and the newspaper reports, the general public, a different impression that government officials and ministers are just having parties and a good time on their monies, which is as far from the truth as east is from the west. On page 9, on audit point 27, the audit office discusses, for instance, alcohol consumption. They quote section 11, and that has to be section 11, 3 of the PMF. They didn't say that, but it must be of the PMFL. which indicates that no bar should be reimbursed for travel-related expenses, and that the chief officer can issue reasonable rules prohibiting the consumption of alcohol in the workplace other than official functions. Now, under Section 11.3, it does not state, Mr. Chairman, that the chief officer can issue reasonable rules prohibiting the consumption of alcohol in the workplace other than official functions, unless the audit office is speaking to something else. Maybe I can stop here and they can tell me what they're speaking to. But if that's the PMFL, then it's not so. I would like to know, where did this section come from? What law or regulation? Maybe Mr. Swarbrooks can tell me what it is, and we could look at it.
Through you, Mr. Chair. As the report says in paragraph 29, that section's in the personal regulations.
Then what? Personnel. Not the PMFL. Personnel, which deals with the civil service and not elected officials. But anyway, the way number 29 is written, the audit office, I would think, seems to be trying to connect the two pieces, which I think gives the reader the impression that the two are connected, and I don't think they are. One is talking about reimbursement for expenses related to official travel, and the other is speaking about employees consuming alcohol at the workplace other than official functions in which the chief officer can issue reasonable rules. The audit office, I think, is trying to combine the two sentences, and it would make it seem like it is not allowed for alcohol to be consumed, purchased by the government elected officials, for instance. This is not speaking of purchasing, Mr. Chairman, but consuming alcohol at the workplace other than official functions. And once again, the audit office, I think, is communicating incorrect information to the reader. At least I think the reader gets a wrong impression because of the mix-up, and the general public. I don't know who would be drinking alcohol up in the glass house. I don't know if that's happening these days. It didn't happen with me under my time. Anyway, when comparing the figures stated by the audit office in audit point 29, Mr. Chairman, the expenditure to me is not significant. As the Ministry of Douala, which is the Ministry of District Administration, spent $29,480 on 3 Christmas parties, which is the equivalent of $10,000 roughly per party. The beverage consumption, which is included, is the equivalent of $2,000 per party when you take the audit office figures. The Ministry of Finance, according to the audit office, held 5 entertainment events. They say 3 Christmas parties, a special function, and a birthday party, totaling $17,530, which includes $5,810 in beverages for all the events. And when we examine this, the cost per event is the equivalent of $3,506, which cannot be significant expenditure when compared to others in the government. Yeah, if you were just giving somebody a Pepsi, you would say that, but that's not the type you do at most functions, including the governor. She has wine, good one too, and rum, good one too. But what is important from my standpoint, members, is the audit office is leaving out valuable information. I think to give the reader, and I look at this as a member, an impression that all the government ministers are doing is partying because they failed to report that the special function and supposedly birthday held by the Minister of Finance, what they were. I certainly never had any birthday party for me in my 30 years in government that was held except a little cake function. They don't say that we, the Minister of Finance, held the meeting for Bellingham when he was here at the Pedro Castle, and you can believe there was some cool drinks there for Bellingham's visit. And they didn't say anything that there was a function held to join in the Jubilee celebration of Her Majesty the Queen, as the Foreign Office had asked all the territories to participate in. I think many of us, if not all of us, would have attended both of them, those things. The birthday party the audit office is accusing the Minister of Finance of having was not in fact a birthday party for anyone locally. We did have those functions, but was part of the Queen's Jubilee celebration and the minister's visit. And again, I want to emphasize that all this could have been confirmed if the audit office had followed normal audit practices and protocol, as far as I'm concerned, and seek to confirm the reasons for these expenditures by speaking with senior staff or myself as the previous Minister of Finance, whom, of course, was being denigrated here. Now, there were some Christmas parties held, but until recently, the policies were open for Christmas parties. You sort of use your best guidance as to what you spent the last year and the size of the department and so on. Now they're giving you $25. I don't know where you're going to spend that down Foster's food bar to get a soup and sandwich. But anyway, that's what the policy is now. It's $25. Then it wasn't. You went by the size of your ministry and you looked at what was spent in previous years and say, well, this year we can only spend this, or we can spend a little bit more and let the staff enjoy themselves. I certainly believe in that, Mr. Chairman. I have no apologies that I had 3 Christmas parties for the staff in my ministry. They worked hard. They worked hard to produce the work that the country is enjoying and seeing surpluses now. All of them. All of my various departments, and I had, as I said, it must have been 14 areas that I had to deal with. And so, yes, I think we had a few Christmas parties. Remember when it was down at Neptune's? That couldn't have been anything much. One at Papagallo, I think it was, could have been a little bit more. But is that wrong for the government of the country who's spending $600 million and have staff doing that work? Is that wrong, Mr. Chairman? I don't think so. But the audit office seems to think that that it shouldn't be done. And certainly, I would think that all of that expense, whatever it is, receipts are available, should be available, because it's all local. And Neptune would have given them a bill, an invoice, and they would have paid it. So they would see what it's for. Now, a while ago, Mr. Hugh asked about that, and I said, well, I don't know the lengths that you would want it extrapolated, whether you're eating chicken or you're eating fish or you're eating curry goat. I don't know all the details, but certainly there would be an invoice, and it should be in government. But, Mr. Chairman, when comparing the figures stated by the audit office in audit point 29, I do not think this expenditure is out of place. As I said, what is important here is the audit office, I think, is leaving out valuable information to give the reader an impression, again, that all we were doing is partying, as they failed to report that the special function, unless they didn't have the information themselves, but they ought to know, because I believe the auditor himself, if not the bear did one, the next one there, Mr. Martin, I guess, is the next one, but Mr. Swearbrick. One of them must have been up there by Bellingham's parties. They would not have been attended my Christmas parties for the staff, no, but they would have known about some of this themselves. I'll stop there before I move on to the next point. And that will get, I think, to Mr. Connolly's point of policies or controls in place for members of the LA and so on. And Mr. Chairman, I am speaking as I recall the events that we held and what they were for. As I said, I can't speak to finite detail because I don't control invoices and stuff like that. I was in charge of policy. I said, yes, let's spend this money. And yes, I'm willing to spend this money for staff or on parties. I can tell you they had no such, I will get to that point somewhere about, but they never had no birthday party for McKeever Bush. Never did. We will get to that point because it's mentioned here, Mr. Chairman, so I will get to it.
Okay, please proceed.
It's mentioned several places. If none of my colleagues have any questions on those things, where it talks about no policies or controls in place for members of the LA. On page 10, the audit point 32, the audit office stated it examined whether procedures existed for effectively managing the travel and hospitality expenditures of members of the assembly. To me, it is not clear by the report if they reviewed other areas of government to determine if they too had policies and if they too were compliant. I don't know if it's just good enough to just look at two areas of government, two ministries, and make a blanket statement that there is no policies or procedures. I don't know that I can't say that that is fair, and I don't know what they looked at because they don't say. On that point, I don't know if Mr. Conley want to ask anything there, or go on to talk about ineffective procedures for processing travel expenditures. Maybe that's what he's talking about there. But let me get to the point, and then you can see. On page 11, Mr. Chairman, on page 11, audit point 35, the audit office speaks of reviewing procedures in place relating to travel advances and claims. However, what the audit office fails to report to the reader and the public is the sample size they considered for travel advances and the period the travel advances related to. For instance, on page 11, audit point 38, the audit office says that in 2011 and 12, one ministry had written off $167,000 for travel advances that were issued between a period of 2003 to 2009. Now that spans the last 2 years of one government and a whole of the next government, a period of between 2 and 8 years earlier. The audit office does not, I think, provide enough information for the reader to reflect the true position or impact of that statement. The statement does not indicate if this write-off relates to one individual or more than one individual. It does not state which ministry it relates to or the person or persons the travel advance write-off relates to. And I don't understand why does the audit office fail to disclose the individual or individuals or ministry or department and the specific period that this write-off relates to. They talk about 2003 to 2009, as I say, a period of some 8 years. And two governments and the whole of one government's time. And as a former member of the government at the time 2003 to 2005, May 2005, in fact, at the time, and a member of this Public Accounts Committee now, I certainly would like to see exactly what the audit office is talking about, who they are talking about, who spent this money, who it is written off for. I think we ought to question it. I want to know what it's all about. On page 11 and audit point 39, the audit office states that 32,000 of the 167,000 above was written off for one senior official. The name or position, and they say written off, I don't know what they meant by that, whether they didn't have, whether that person, when they say written off, whether that person, I take it is that that person was supposed to pay and they didn't pay. When we write off a health bill, it's that somebody can't pay, right? And that's what we, in government's parlance, in government's information, that's what we say when we say write off. Was this a case that the person couldn't pay it, they determined that? Or was this the case of they didn't have the documentation, so they had to write it off? But do you write off because you don't have documentation? I think the name or the position, the title, the ministry, the period in question, the reason for travel advance, and what was the 32,000 that was written off spent on. This is not mentioned at all in this report. And why don't the audit office, why they didn't release that information? The audit office, I think, can easily be able to identify the reason and time, and the ministry at least, if they don't want to call names of the person, for the travel advances through the description in the system or on the travel advance form itself. So if they didn't want to say who the individual was that the 32,000 was written off for, then they could have easily said through those other avenues. On page 11, audit point 40, the audit office speaks about travel advance again. And again, there is no mention of what sample size they looked at and what period the travel advance is related to. The audit office, Mr. Chairman, mentioned that they noted 75 advances totaling $76,000 that was outstanding for a period over 30 days, which 30 days that is the audit office, considered a reasonable settlement period. But what, to me, they failed to mention in the report is how many travel advances they selected to review in total and the period these advances were outstanding. By using these words, Mr. Chairman, and failing to report its sample size, the audit office gives the impression to the reader that the travel advance system is falling apart. For instance, suppose, Mr. Chairman and members, that the sample size was 500 travel advances. Then they would say 85% of what they selected was not processed in a timely manner, 75 out of 500. However, if the audit office actual sample size was 100, then 75% of the travel advances would have been completed in a reasonable time frame, and we would really say the government travel advance system was working as expected. What is obvious and clear here, that the full and complete picture is certainly not being given to the public, and this report is intended for readers to read something which is, I think, belittling and causes reputations of civil servants and elected officials to become tarnished because of the way it's done. I'll stop there on that point, Mr. Chairman.
Just a question. In any of these recommendations by the Auditor General, do you agree with at least the premise behind the recommendations in terms of that systems should be put in place and they weren't?
As a person looking on, and I don't know if I can separate that from being an elected official, being a member of this committee, and being a former minister in the positions I had. I don't know how much I can separate, but looking on, no, what many of the things the Auditor General has pointed out, we come to a place because we want government today to be different than it was in the past 40 years when, as I said earlier, when ministers could even be chairman of their various boards. That is not done today. Although back then the ministers knew what was going on, today you hardly know what's going on your boards until trouble blows up in your face. But because of so-called international standards and because of so-called good governance, none of that takes place. It's done today, and therefore we expect a different sort of governance, and we call it good governance. Mind you, some of it is very backward. Some of it is, I think, for a small island, it's difficult and don't make for good operational time of the government and gives us much more red tape than we need. But many of the things the Auditor General points out, I certainly agree. Since we are expected, well, we're going to have to go that direction, yeah. But the way the report is written, no. I think it's done spitefully. But let's not get into it. I think it's done very spitefully to make people look bad, civil servants and politicians. But I agree that if there is a new environment that is expected of us, by all means, let's get that new environment. And then everybody knows that years ago, you didn't have to produce these receipts. Today, you have to produce them, and everybody knows where they're at.
Mr. Chairman, through you, thank you. You know, when I look at the objective of the audit, and the fact that it was done to try to determine whether government was managing official travel and hospitality expenditures properly and with due regard to value for money. And I'm just quoting from page 1 here, and where the Auditor General has said then that he's concluded that the expenditures were not managed effectively and efficiently, leading to a high likelihood that the government mishandled significant amounts of public resources.
What point, where are you reading
Page
from?
1, paragraph 2 of the executive summary. And just in terms of following on from my last question, having been a minister and premier at the time in question, that's what I'm asking if you agree
Being a
with
minister,
that.
you're a councillor, and you well know that things are done that you don't know anything about. And if you look at it and you say, well, yes, I would have done it, try to do it a little bit different. And probably we need to shape this difference so that it's absolutely clear what the civil servant needs to do. But where in the past that civil servants had sort of a blanket way of operating and doing things, I don't know that you can crucify them. I don't think you should crucify them for it, because that was where it was allowed. You want to go forward into something new, it's different. But remember what they had. But the way he's writing it, he says, it was the likelihood that the government mishandled significant amounts of public resources. Was it mishandled, or was that the way we operated as a government, surplus or deficit?
Yeah, but Mr. Bush, I mean, I guess as a member of this committee, what I'm concerned about, through you, Mr. Chairman, is that if the Auditor General carries out an audit and their findings as a government and for best practice and good governance, are these findings that a government, elected government members and also the civil service will take on board as being a true reflection of the situation that existed at the time and what we're going to do as a government to move from that point. I'm not talking about castigating anyone or pointing fingers. I'm just asking whether, as a member of government at that time, you can agree or not with these findings.
I don't agree with how he puts his words, okay? No.
The essence of the findings, i.e.
but
there wasn't sufficient
if he has
systems
a
in place.
desire, Mr. Conley, to you, Mr. Chairman, to improve the system, yes. Where it's going to be more cumbersome, where it's going to cost government more to put in place some of these things, and at the end of the day we don't get any better results, but we have to question whether we should. But yes, on the broad take of things, you want best practice and you want good governance. As I think that's what I was trying to get across, the difference between what took place years ago and the way we had a sort of a blanket way of dealing with things, rather than now you want everything to be according to international standards, operated according to present international standards. Yes, I certainly, anything that can improve, I certainly would agree with, as long as I say it's not going to make us more, give us more red tape that's going to draw us further and further and more expenditure than what we did before. To handle what you know, any sort of process.
This is actually for the Auditor General. In your opinion, when you're looking at some of these numbers, et cetera, especially the ones that Mr. Bush pointed out, what would you have deemed appropriate and normal ratios for spending in each of these areas, i.e. the percentages that you quote on page 5? And I asked this to say, we were, I guess, directed by Mr. Bush to say that we needed to look at the overall budget at the time of these expenses being incurred. But when I look at the table on page 5, I see 60%, 12%, and then a declining balance all the way down to 0.2%. And I'm just trying to figure out, you know, what causes the Auditor General's office kind of concerned with the A, imbalance, and B, just how that budget was or was not followed at the time, because presumably you looked at the budgets for those periods, and then what are kind of normal ratios if you're comparing it to other governments, or is it just a very subjective thing?
My first point is very subjective at the end of the day. I think it comes back to the point of the audit. The audit was about how government actually managed the travel and hospitality expenditures. It's not about whether they should travel or not. And as I said in my opening comments and at the front of this report, is that government does need to travel, and it has to be able to do that for various reasons. Some of them which are difficult to actually show the business case for, but there are, you know, for example, international relations and stuff like that can be challenged to demonstrate, but they do have to be able to travel. And we didn't examine the quantum in that sense. The information provided on table 2 is in terms of to show the level of expenditures and to show you where we concentrated our activity because of that fact. You know, the point of the report was about how the government administration managed expenditure, travel and hospitality expenditures to ensure that they got efficient value for money from that expenditures. And the point of our audit was that the findings were that they couldn't demonstrate how they did that. Now, a lot of the travel would have been worthwhile, valid, appropriate travel, but there was no clear demonstration of the benefit of it at times, and there was no clear policies and procedures for how they managed that travel and hospitality expenditure. That was basically came down to the point of our audit. It wasn't to say that ministry should travel that amount or that ministry should travel that amount, and what's indicative. It depends on the nature of the business. It depends where you're located. Depends where you've got to go to. There's a whole pile of factors that impact the level of travel. You know, so I think that's the fundamentals. The quantum depends on the nature of the business.
Mr. Chairman, you see, the Auditor General don't have any, he have no say over policy. That's what we get elected for. And he has no say whether government travel or not, whether they should or should not travel. And when he says he didn't see, I think what he's saying, he didn't see any clear benefit of travel on what he looked at. If you look at those periods of time, I got to vehemently disagree with the auditor. This is where we part ways, because the benefits of me going to Miami time after time, meeting with the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association and other travel partners in Miami who flew from others, because that's a good point to meet, has been telling and told up in our present cruise numbers. You think that just happened since this government got in? Well, you all must be sleeping, or you must be joking to think that that could happen overnight. That took 3-4 years of planning, and it took cajoling and took talking to them and making them understand that we appreciate and want them here. So when you say that there's no clear benefit of the travel, I don't know what measurement he's using. I don't know what he expected to get, but certainly the benefits are very clear. When I went to the OECD in June of 2009, we had just gotten off of the blacklist and became on the gray list. And I had to fight within 3 months, May or June till August, to get us off of that gray list. You think that I could do that sitting down talking to the Auditor General, talking about counting beans and don't see the difference between apples and oranges? No. It took travel. It took me to get to them to sit down and talk, and to get them an understanding we are willing to write the proper tax agreements to get us off. So that is the benefit. If you're talking about any other kind of travel, if you're talking about promotion, well, I think, and this is debatable, but because the government can say, well, they did it, but I don't know where they did it. Certainly they can't do it going to London. And talking to the man on the television in London, no, this stuff what we're benefiting today, the surplus and everything else, the projects came about because we traveled. That's the benefits of travel. So I don't agree with him there. But, Mr. Connolly, I agree that there has to be, in this new era, new time that people are expecting different, and we should make them know, you want this, but remember this could slow down things too. You want all this regulation, but this can slow down things. You're not going to get it as fast. You're not going to get it the way you think you can get it.
Mr.
Because
Connolly?
it's a whole different ball game today.
Thank you, Mr. Bush, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I'm not going to speak for the Auditor General, but I think that, you know, based on what I've read, especially in the findings on page 7, you know, we're talking about the lack of proper records and then proper procedures once those came up. And, you know, I just, again, as a member of this committee, that is the ill that I think this audit is trying to cure. It's stating not, I mean, it doesn't mention names. It talks about senior officials, ministers, etc. It's not pointing fingers at anyone specifically. But what it says is that at the time we looked at these snapshots that were occurring, these are the things that we found, and we find, and the findings were that government officials failed to manage travel and hospitality expenditures effectively. And it's now in this committee's, I guess, purview to accept or not accept that finding, and then question the relevant witnesses as to what's happening since this report and the recommendations that were made. What's the time frame in trying to either take some of these recommendations on board or state the recommendations that you don't agree with or you want to put aside, and then B, talk about that, I guess, ideal policy and procedures place going forward. I mean, and I think that, you know, I hear Mr. Bush and I hear each of the points, but I think that after this, I'm going to shut up basically and just listen to the points and then move back to the report and the other things. So I don't have any more questions,
Yeah.
Mr. Bush.
The matter of pointing fingers is not the thing. Here we have a report, Mr. Chairman, that basically has attacked 2 ministries. Now, I was a minister of one of them. Who do you think the public looking at? And all I'm saying is that things when said need to be absolutely clear when you are dealing with these kind of issues. Because you can tarnish elected officials and you can tarnish civil servants. So if somebody's done wrong, let's say who it is or get close to it as possible. Don't leave a blanket statement that could say, oh, that's McKeever or that's Juliana O'Connor Conley. They say that our ministry spent 70%, but we had 2 of the biggest ministries, by the way, and I think I pointed that out. But what I would like to say to my colleagues is this: they need to understand that while today the past government and today and the present civil servants is looked at in this light, you better understand your turn is next. What goes around comes around. Although it's really not, to me, most of this don't help the country. Anyway, when they jump on you all, then I don't know whether you'll cry, row, shout, what, but I'll be here.
Please proceed, Mr. Mr. Bush.
Did I get to the point of the credit card policies disregarded?
If I remember correctly, Mr. Bush, your last comment was with regard to paragraph 40 of the report. That's where you left off.
Was that on page 12?
That was on page 11.
Page 11. Page 11. Page 11.40, yes. I want to address this point that they complains about on page 12 and the audit point 45. The audit office mentions $458,000 in travel and hospitality, not supported by receipts and formal documentation. Maybe we've gone through some of that, but fails to state which ministry or department this amount relates to and what period it covers. They also state that it was unclear if the expenditure had any business purpose. Now, you see, that is a very important statement, because what will you be spending on? If you're not, even if you're not successful, you're attempting. You're traveling and attempting to get business done. Even if you're not successful, you've gone abroad for that. What else could it be for? And why did they put that out? The paper carry that? And what does people say? The government accountants and data clerks normally put in descriptions, Mr. Chairman, in the IRIS system. We know that's not the best system in the world. And I want to find out what the $458,000 represents. And this would enable anyone to see if the audit office is correct. If the audit office says descriptions were not clear, then certainly audit office officials could speak to senior management or again to the previous responsible minister, who were myself or O'Connor Conley, or if that's who they're talking about, to obtain clarification. And if they have done this, then what is the evidence of that conversation? Where are the facts then? Obviously, they didn't talk to me. On the same page 12, the audit office states that a former minister self-approved the payment of transactions incurred on their credit card in the amount of approximately $71,000. Which minister? And what for? I don't know if they seem to know what the true figure is. That was self-approved by that minister in relation to that credit card mentioned in the paragraph above. As also, Mr. Chairman and members, look closely, as also in audit point 77. If you look on it, the audit office states the minister approved approximately $70,000. So what really is the figure? As approximately 71 or $70,000 are different figures. Anyway, I think this is doing nothing but giving readers and the public inaccurate and information that is questionable. The audit office fails to state which ministry this relates to and what period of time this self-approving took place by the minister they complain about, what it was for, when it took place, where it took place. That's what needs to be said. That's what needs to be said. So I don't know if anybody have any questions or they just want content to listen to me go on. But I will carry on, Mr. Chairman, if you don't have anything.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, when on the point of mishandling of public funds by ministers and officials, on page 19, audit point 71, the audit office speaks about the trip to Panama, costing $71,000 for 43 people that included hotel, airfare, ground transportation, logistics and events planning, and cost of entertainers. Now, let me say, because I am most familiar with this one, Mr. Chairman, what must be borne in mind is that this is the equivalent of $1,650 per person, including airfare and hotel. This amount surely cannot be seen to be extravagant or significant amount in relation to the benefits that have and were expected to be derived from the launching of the Panama Gateway. What else must be noted, Mr. Chairman, is that this was a government budgeted and approved event and directly linked to the government of that day strategic objectives and plans for expansion in Latin America. That launch was to open the Panama Gateway, in which the Cayman Islands would obtain direct benefit from revenue streams such as the increased tourism and other passenger travel, and to establish important connections to the wealthy South American countries for these islands. There has been much said about this. When they published it, the papers as usual has a fun day. And opposition and government too, who should know better, carry on because it was the previous government. They're not even looking, Mr. Chairman, at the benefit that they themselves are benefiting from it. There has been much said about this, but the breakdown of the 43 people consisted, Mr. Chairman, of the wider tourism officials, people from the hotel and condo market, travel agents, Pirates Week groups, entertainers, that is the band, and a member or members of the press, but I believe we only paid for one member of the press. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, how we can open a gateway for so little, $71,000, and that anyone would believe that for the 3 people costing $71,000, inclusive of paying for food, hotel, airfare, receptions, and transportation in Panama, is too much expenditure for a country trying to increase its revenue base through tourism and development. And you make a big hullabaloo about it, something that was budgeted for, talked about in this House through the Finance Committee. It seems the Audit Office believes, and I'm going to say this, it's all right, Mr. Chairman, for past and new governors to spend $800,000 on entertainment and other expenses per year for social events and the entertainment of friends and associates, finger foods and sandwiches, wine and other liquor, but somehow it's out of place or mismanagement for the government of that day to take significant key industry partners and individuals to the launching in Panama that could and has proven beneficial to these islands. What value or financial benefits have we gained from the former government and others spending that $800,000 on the social events and entertainment of friends and associates involved, as I said, finger foods and sandwiches, wine and liquor? And what business case, should I ask the Auditor General, has been developed for those events, outlining its audits on them? Have any audits been done? I want to ask as a member of the committee, has he done any audit?
We haven't done a specific audit, done a performance audit on the expenditures of Government House at this stage.
No, of course not. They are untouchables. But it's bad for an elected official to carry out his policy that he was elected on to increase the revenue of this country and to do it in the way that it can get done. I don't have no apologies on that, Mr. Chairman. I don't think that $71,000, Mr. Chairman, was out of whack in that expenditure. And when Cayman Airways went there and they go there seasonal, it's doing the right thing. It's opening a gateway in Latin America that is badly needed. The Audit Office speaks of 12 guests of government officials in Table 8 on page 19 of the report. And the words used would give the reader the impression that these persons were friends, read it, or family of government officials that attended the Panama launch. The Audit Office could have determined these persons by inquiring of the previous minister or the chief officer that they were persons from the travel and the tourism industry, including property managers, etc., as I have outlined. Mr. Chairman, on page 20, Audit Point 72, the Audit Office speaks of Christmas parties relating to the 1st of July 2009 through June 2012, in which the state government entities spent approximately $223,000 on parties and gifts for employees. You see that, Mr. Chairman? According to Table 10, the Audit Office states the Ministry of Finance spent $28,000 on 3 Christmas parties and gifts. This does not make sense. And it certainly contradicts what is stated on page 9, audit point 29, in which they state the ministry spent a total of 17,530 on 5 events. These figures certainly do not correlate, as they say the 3 Christmas parties alone were $28,000. I don't understand that. That's confusing to me. And the accuracy of these statements are of concern to me also, because on the same page 9, the audit office states the Minister of District Administration spent $29,480 on 3 Christmas parties. However, on page 20, they state they spent $106,000. Against this has to be a discrepancy. Now, maybe they have a way of explaining it, I don't know. But it's highly unlikely, but I don't know. So I can't say, Mr. Chairman, that the Minister of District Administration, Mrs. O'Connor Conley, spent approximately $70,000 on gifts for staff. What in the world were these gifts? What was it? Don't we want to know as a committee? I certainly like to know. What is it? It is also of concern that the audit office didn't review the other ministries, departments, and entities which made up 40% of the total $223,000 according to Table 10. Look at Table 10. In Table 11 on page 21, the audit office mentioned what it calls unusual expenditure. However, it is clear that not enough research and questioning is performed of senior staff or the past minister by the audit team. I don't know if anybody have anything there to say, Mr. Chairman. But I certainly want to know what the $70,000 on gifts were from the Minister of Dollar. Highly unlikely, but I want to see it. I would like to know as a member of this committee. Mr. Chairman, if nobody says anything there on apprenticeships, transportation, on page 15, number 60, the audit office discusses $272,000 incurred for ground transportation. Once again, I don't know if the period was mentioned when this travel occurred, but I guess this is pointing to, and should I ask him, was pointing to one of the 3 years, a part of the 3 years that he's on looking at the Minister of Finance? Can I ask that question? Is that correct? Transportation, $272,000. Was that period was one of the 3 years that you say you audited? You see what I'm talking about, Mr. Chairman? On page 15 and number 60.60 of the audit.
Mr. Bush, I see where you're referring to the 272, but I would just remind you here as a witness to give evidence rather than ask questions of the audit.
Well, so far nobody's asking any questions, so I'll go into it myself.
Well, we have
that I want information on. I am a witness, but I still have a right to ask a question as a witness in case you don't know.
Auditor General?
I'm actually unsure to what the question was.
I'm trying to find out, was this $272,000 incurred for ground transportation, was it one of the 3 or part of the 3-year period that you looked at the Ministry of Finance? I am suspecting that's what it is, but I don't see that.
I think it probably would cover the 3-year period.
It covers the 3-year periods, and
Okay.
this is a reflection of the FOI request and specific details that were not included in the FOI request.
I don't know about FOIs. I know that this is what you wrote, and that's what I'm questioning. But so this is you're saying part of the 3-year period. That's what you're saying, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thanks very much.
It's over the 3-year period.
They also mentioned that 398 paid during 1st of January 2009 to September 2012. Now, that again spans 2 governments. To January to May was one government. That changed. And then September, of course, from May 2009 to September 2012.
What paragraph are you specifically referring
Page
to?
16. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, page 16.
Yes. September 2012 to two ground transportation companies for the use of limos, vans, and SUVs. And they say here this is our 3-year period, which, Mr. Chairman, is a period equivalent of 132,666 per year. They just say that there. If you go, yes. they say this is over a 3-year period. The audit office did fail to make the breakdown of the 398, of which ministry department makes up this amount, the reasons why and which the companies were used, and so on. They didn't point that out. They pointed out the figure, a block figure. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, and as a witness I say this, I don't know what the cost was or what the contract was that of the company that did my transport in Florida in particularly. The service, I didn't or was not involved in contracting or knowing what the cost was, because simply as minister, I didn't do that. I can say that the service I received, I was satisfied with it. When I traveled, I didn't travel for one meeting. I traveled for 3 or 4 meetings a day in Miami, and sometimes outside of Miami. I traveled for several meetings, and these meetings were all over. My transportation, transport at the time, the company that did that waited on me, for instance, Mr. Chairman, to take me to the next meeting. And this also all included to and from the airport, to and from the hotels, and wherever I had to go. When I got elected, Mr. Chairman, I found that transport company in place and had been in place for some time. And I certainly appreciated the transport and appreciated the drivers for their professionalism. And I certainly, when my wife went with me, I certainly was satisfied that we were well taken care of to the point of transport. But I don't know what the cost was. I can't speak to that because, as I said, I don't know what the contract was, and I don't know. I know that the companies were in place for years. They were in place. And I want to state for the records, I don't drive in limos. I go in a truck or an SUV. I probably had to take a short drive in a town car. Well, maybe sometimes they provided that very short, but when you had to travel, like I had to be running up and down from one part of Miami Port to talk to the FCCA over to Kendall area where they sometimes had meetings, then I certainly preferred a bigger vehicle to be running up and down with. But as to what they were paid, I don't know. What the cost was, I don't know. But if you take those over a 3-year period, it's equivalent of $132,000 per year for transport. If you get in transport and you figure out as many meetings that I've had in Miami and elsewhere in the States, because this covers all of that, when we traveled. For instance, Mr. Chairman, when we were doing the bond, I went from Miami, we went to Los Angeles, so you had to do transport there. You went to San Francisco, that was transport. You went to Boston, that was transport. You went to UK, that was transport. And you went to Hong Kong and Singapore, all using transport. So I don't know how they believe that in this day and age that you're going to get away much cheaper, where you must be going to use a box with 4 cartwheels on it to run you up and down, but you're not going to have proper transport unless it's costing you very expensive. Maybe the audit office don't understand this because maybe they're a little bit outmoded themselves. Maybe where they come from, Mr. Chairman, they don't have to run up and down. Maybe they're talking about strictly international points. But sometimes those international points are not the reality that a person has to face. You know that yourself, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, I would say to you, I think your point's been well made. Can we move to the next one?
Mr. Chairman, if you
I
look at...
don't want to
Yes. I hope the point is well taken by the members, if not by the audit office, because I don't think they've taken it in. But I hope the members understand what I'm saying. And I remind members again, today it's me, but your time coming. Apprenticeship program, the audit office left out the relevant details for the reader. When did this event occur? What was the number of persons or students involved? Where was the event held, and so on? This is stuff that I think that when you give that report, it's particularly that you're giving that report to the public before the public can get the information that they're getting today. then what else is the public going, what else is the reporters going to write? Ask Wendy what she wrote. Look at what she wrote today. I think it's today came out. Look at it. When they write. They write it as they see it. And if they don't like it, they put a little licking against you. And I complain about this, Mr. Chairman, because it's not doing civil servants any good, because we're a small island, and certainly it don't help me. It don't kill me, as they know they've done that time and time again, and I still win elections. So they don't kill me easy. And I still a hard man to date. But these are the kind of things I think that how many numbers, what was the number of students? How many persons attended? The office mentioned a buyout on rental property. However, it fails to provide the reader and the public with key information such as what was the television show, what did the TV show relate to, when was the agreement made to have a TV show put in place, and why was it canceled? I would imagine, and I don't recall this, and what I do recall is something was prepared, and when we got elected, we had, as far as we could go with it, and found out it couldn't work, and we canceled it before it cost, because when you're into hundreds of thousands of dollars, so I think we canceled at that time. But I'm not quite clear on it. I don't have the clarity of mind on that particular subject, but I do recall something, during 2005 and 2009, that minister then used to like TV stuff and all this show stuff. Spent on a boxing event, it spent over $2 million. So I don't know what this was. Anyway, I imagine that it must have got canceled before it started to cost government too much. The retirement party for the collective customs. Our retirement parties, Mr. Chairman, are customary in government and have been for many years for long-standing civil servants. The audit office knew that this was a retirement farewell function for the collector, yet the audit office chose not to provide the reader with pertinent information such as who was the civil servant, what was his responsibilities, how long was he employed with the government, how many people attended the event, etc. The audit office also again used the word party to make the reader gravitate to believing all the elected government does is how parties and cocktail receptions. Mr. Chairman, the fact is here, the department staff wanted to have something for the collector of customs who was retiring. Here is a long-standing civil servant, I guess with close to 40 years of service. They had no funds. Nobody was doing anything for the collector of customs. There was not going to be anything. They had no funds. I was the minister, and I was asked as the Minister of Finance and responsible for the Customs Department to help the department hold something appreciative for the collector of customs. I didn't attend. I wasn't there. But I certainly agreed. Because I don't believe that because we are government and because the audit office and anybody else in the country wants to believe that civil servants are machines and they don't have feelings, they don't have family, and it's just there to be denigrated. I never believed that in my entire life, and I don't believe so today. Here is a man 40 years, and if he took $10,000 to spend them, you can tell me that that is out of place for a man that worked for 40 years and in a department that brings in the most revenue for government, and they want to belittle that? Why? You know what is true? I'll tell you this. I would not want to be a civil servant under circumstances in today's country, today's Cayman, for nothing in this world. And that was something that people wanted to gravitate to. When we were growing up, we wanted to try to get a civil service job, work with the government. Today, they're being belittled, they're being investigated, they're being cussed, they're being talked about. I don't know. I don't know how you can really give them an environment to do better. I know one thing, giving them a little medal, talking about long service, not helping. So, Mr. Chairman, that was what that was for. I hope that explanation is okay for unless members have a question of me.
Mr. Bush, I just need to ask you, how much longer do you think you're going to be?
No, not long. I'm winding up.
Okay.
But I'm dealing with those things.
I guess we've got witnesses waiting as well.
I'm trying to deal with and I should end before one, on my points. Now, here is where I think they're being quite nasty. Prayer meeting rentals, West Bay. When in the world did the government of the Cayman Islands ever had a prayer meeting that we paid for in West Bay? When? Here is one of the most atrocious and misleading sections of this audit. Firstly, I want to say that government has never had or paid for any prayer meeting in West Bay in my 30 years of being elected. Not once. What they are calling a prayer meeting, Mr. Chairman, was the National Legislative Prayer Breakfast, which we launched in the 1990s with the help of Dr. Adlin Merrin and personnel from the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. That's how we got our National Prayer Breakfast. They invited us up there to two National Prayer Breakfasts. I went in between 2000 and the 1990s. It was held. What we did here was to hold a National Prayer Breakfast for parliamentarians, judiciary, civil servants, the press, and other guests from the wider community, inclusive of the governor. I don't know when they could determine that that was a prayer meeting held in West Bay. What else is they writing this for? To talk about West Bay. And I'm the minister that they're pointing out. But to try to make McKeever Bush look bad as a possible come out before that court case. What took place in question, Mr. Chairman and members, is that the portfolio of internal and external affairs who was normally pay for the National Prayer Breakfast and who had it in their budget over the years did not budget for that year, and the deputy governor would not agree to give the Speaker of the House, who was in charge of the prayer breakfast, any funding for the National Prayer Breakfast. The Honorable Speaker, left in charge of an event that we were going to hold, sought assistance from the Ministry of Finance staff, and the ministry agreed to give the Speaker the funding for the National Prayer Breakfast. There was no prayer meeting in West Bay that the Cayman Islands government paid for. That is utter rubbish and a deliberate attempt to smear me. Utter rubbish. They should apologize. The next one, Mr. Chairman, is this so-called birthday lunch for the former minister. Mr. Chairman, I don't know when the government of the Cayman Islands ever had any birthday lunch for McKeever. I don't know when. I don't know. I think it is painting a picture to the reader and the general public that its government officials are misusing funds, as they have said. I have had more than 30 birthdays, including next week, Tuesday, the big 6-0, when in government. And the government has never had any birthday party or lunch for McKeever Bush. This was, in fact, a staff retreat, and we had a breakfast that morning. That was held either a few days before or after. I don't think it was on the 20th of January that year, but a few days before or a few days after my birthday, which is 20th of January, and which I was at. And they had that breakfast, and they had a lunch too. At the lunch, they did have a cake for me. Not a birthday party, as the audit office indicated, and he would like the public to believe. It's nonsense. It was a staff retreat where they met early enough to have breakfast. And maybe, I don't know if they sang happy birthday to me then, but I know I had tea, and I know I had something to eat, because we had breakfast and the whole staff did. Then we had a retreat, and then we had lunch. And I know at that lunch we had a cake. Yet they writes it like we had spent what the governor spends for all that little finger food down at Government House. Shame on them. I should say so, Mr. Chairman. The rental of the private residence for the rent at the residence at the Ritz. Now, this had nothing to do with anything that I would have gotten any money out of. Just want to make it absolutely clear. Due to the lack of information provided to the reader, one may well think, Mr. Chairman, that this was a few meetings being held relating to whatever, and we had just had it there. But what it was is that we were having meetings there relating to the Shetty Hospital project. That meeting discussions were relating also to the port facilities in Cayman and proposed cruise facilities and a marina development in Cayman Brac. That also took place at the same location. The benefits of some of these meetings are being currently seen by all the positive feedback, publicity, etc. the country is receiving, especially from the Shetty Hospital. That's what it's all, that was what about. We couldn't have it in one of the rooms because at that time I think the rooms were taken up. We were there for a big conference, but all those things were held on the same day, and we got, I think, was a private residence, and I don't know how much it was he said we spent. I don't know if that says that, Mr. Chairman, if you have it there. Does it say what was spent, Mr. Chairman? I'm not sure. Rental of private residence at Ritz?
I have the same information that you, rental of private
Okay.
residence at the
Right, now say what
Ritz-Carlton
was
for
spent.
private
I know
use.
it couldn't have been any more because we didn't have lunch or anything there because there was a conference going on. So we just had the meeting there, and of course we had to pay for the time. But that was the only time that the various people that came down from Cayman Brac could be available, and that we had for the Shetty people was also have, and I may be in a different room at the time, but those meetings were going on. That's when that took place. I don't know how much it cost, whether it amounted to 3,000 or whatever it cost, but certainly it was money well spent. Mr. Chairman, as a witness, I don't know if I can ask questions. I do have some questions, but maybe you wouldn't want me to, as a witness to ask questions. But it does pertain to audit. If not, Mr. Chairman,
I think it's inappropriate. That's just my view.
I can, rather than quarrel with you, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly just say that, and I have finished that aspect, but in closing what I have said, I think that the way these audits are written, and then I've got to tell me, Mr. Chairman, I saw them prod. The audit staff prod Mr. Hugh when we were discussing the port. I saw them prod Mr. Hugh to tell him to ask me certain questions. So I know what goes on here. The way they write and the wordings they have used and the many important facts that have been left out and has tried to smear good, honest, hard-working civil servants and politicians that have given more than half their lives to try and get something done for this country. It is not helping. It's not helping what Mr. Conley wants to talk about, what Mr. Conley asks about, and Mr. Hugh asks about. They're talking about good governance and what we see, what he says needs to be put in place. What he says that needs to be put in place, if that's what we want, then certainly I agree. The way he writes it, the misinformation, the way that information is put down, the way that misinformation is left out is what bothers me as not only a member, it bothers me as a witness now, but a member of this House and a long-standing public official. It bothers me because we live in a small country, Mr. Chairman, where people likes to think the worst of people. And what they know that can be done is to divide and conquer, because they've been doing that for 1,000 years. Divide and conquer. And so that's what is happening here. The press is happy because the press gets all this information, puts it all out, then regurgitates it back up like was done in Compass today and in CNS. And again, once again, it's all said, the Auditor General said this, and it's like, what are the facts? I hope that they all write the facts as has been stated here today. Again, I can't say anything much about the other aspects of this audit in regards to the Minister of District Administration, but they should call the minister in. In fact, when I come back as a member, I'm going to put that on record, Mr. Chairman, that we do ask her to come and explain. Then you can get the facts not from one side, you get it from both sides, and that's what needs to be done. Fairness must be the order of the day. We need, Mr. Chairman, as you have said, to change the system of reporting. The report should come to the Public Accounts Committee of this Assembly so that what I have done here today can be done here, and that the reporters and thus the reading public of this country can have factual information pertaining to expenditure of funds for work done for these islands, not guesstimates and shenanigans and the way that people can write to make people look bad. Again, I just close with this as a witness. What this public account and why the government need to understand that although I think I was attacked and the past government today and the present civil servants was attacked, this government better understand that their turn is next. What goes around comes around, although it's doing this country no good. No good. I certainly, Mr. Chairman, anything that the Auditor General puts forward, as Mr. Conley suggested, that is good, that can move this country forward, McKeever Bush will walk hand in glove with them. I don't like regulations that overburden us for a small territory. I don't believe it's necessary to make government open and transparent. I think we can do things much simpler and get the same transparency and the same accountability. But when you put all the international standards in place, it bogs us down. It bogs down our investors. And yeah, they say, Mr. Chairman, that this openness and transparency, the investor wants to see that. Our investors want to see it. Our investors want to know that this country is safe. They want to know that the country is run good and that their money in the bank, they don't put money in government. Their money in the bank, they have nothing to do with government money, not investors. In the bank is safe. That's what they want to know. They want to know that our credit rating is safe. Not all of this jargon that auditors and accountants make up so that they can make money and you have to keep hiring them. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman. I didn't want to be called as a witness, but I am glad you did, and I'm glad that the committee gave me this time. And I will now say, if anybody is going to debate this, don't debate it behind my back. I would like to talk while I'm here so I can answer questions about what I said.
Do any members have questions for the witness?
No, Mr. Chairman,
ahead,
through
Mr.
you, well, first of all, I feel compelled to thank Mr. Bush for recognizing the success this government, and in particular our Ministry of Tourism, is having right now. But I do want to put for the record that at no time I recall being prodded by anyone during any of these meetings. So I just want to state that for the record, sir.
Mr. Chairman, just to thank Mr. Joy for his thanks. I know where it was, though. And besides that, I don't know what the successes you're talking about. The only successes that I know you got is good revenue that I left, and a good tourism policy that you haven't changed. And thank God you haven't changed it, Mr. Hugh.
Any other questions for the witness? If not, then I'll say thank you very much, Mr. Bush, for your appearance before the committee, and now excuse you from.
You'll excuse me to go and come back?
Our next witness is Mr. Vinton Chinsey who is the CFO of the Ministry of Home Affairs. I'd like to call him into the room we'll take his testimony at this time. I do need to take 2 minutes for a bathroom break.